Very. Is it a background? Is it a virtual background?
It is background, some hotel room. I don't know what it is.
Very romantic. Very romantic.
Yeah.
Feels like home.
We have 10 seconds left before going live.
Oh.
Now. You may start now.
Hello and welcome to our afternoon session about the CEE Pay TV operators strategic insights, and very warm welcome also to the panelists, which I would like to introduce to you. First of all, meet Katerina Kaskanioti. She is the Pay TV Executive Director for ForceNet in Greece. Then we have Jaromir Gliznik. He's the member of the board at Skylink in Czech Republic. And last but not least, Krzysztof Kajuba, Development Strategy Manager for Orange in Poland. Very well welcome. And before we getting into a longer discussion, we agreed as a panel with the panel to have a short round of questions where everybody has a quick ability to answer, and we would like to use that a little bit to warm up the theme and to get to know more about the strategic insights of these very different operators in these very different markets. So, Katerina, what is content? What is the most successful content in your market?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, and I'm really very happy to attend. It was a very interesting morning. I followed the morning sessions, and really, I think, we had the chance to exchange and learn quite a few things. So thank you for this opportunity. On the content side, as explained, I'm just I'm working for Nova in Greece. And Nova is the first satellite pay television, actually launched 20 years ago, with the main drive on the content. So content is premium content, packaging and producing content is a key driver for our business. Although, the business is a telecommunication and, well, actually broadband and broadcast, offering broadband and broadcast services. So on the content side, we on the linear, I will just divide that into the linear and to the on-demand world. So on the linear side, definitely it is the premium sports and especially Greek Super League, which is the football that drives viewership, especially when the big clubs are playing against each other, the so-called derbies. Then it is when all viewership goes with. When it comes to the non-linear world, which is on the on-demand, let's say, basis, then there for us the kids programming, we see, highlights of viewership on the kids side, and on the blockbuster, let's say, movies. Usually, and if I go to the genre. It is action blockbusters and comedy genre that actually comedy more and more during the last period, probably because of the lockdown, and people really need, just to have something a little bit more light, to enjoy their evenings. So, titles like, The Addams Family or Jumanji or The Informer, Bloodshot, Bad Boys for Life. These are titles that are working extremely well, and they just receive numerous views.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Very, very different mix of the on-demand and the live world, right? So
yeah.
And how's it for you, Jaromir, in Czech Republic? I know you have a very strong market on free-to-air offerings. So what do you see as the highest content or the content in demand for viewers in Czech?
Actually, I can tell some facts from recent research, and it surprised me. Maybe it's impacted a little bit by the COVID crisis. The movies and series occupy 46% of the viewers' time.
Wow.
It's quite a stable number compared to the past, but growing in the youngest generation. Yeah, so with young people, 54% of time spent in front of TV screen are movies and series. Then the talk shows or reality shows, live shows, entertainment are number two, roughly 14% and increasing, compared to the previous research. And then news, 12%, pretty much stable, but very low with young people, 7% with young people. Yeah. So surprisingly, you don't find sports in the top.
That's very
75%, but of course depends how you measure, because the most attractive sports events usually take hours, while the TV broadcast 24/7. Yeah. So even the most popular sports channels can hardly compete to the big commercial TVs broadcasting every day this endless series, etc. So that's the situation in Czech Republic. I would say Slovakia will not be that different. There will be some specifics, but not in the main genres. And the popularity of sports has something to do with the popularity of, on TV, popularity of sports as such in this country. In the times where we had Czech players in Premier League, in Britain, then of course, this was something.
Yeah.
Now, there are not that many, and no big player dates Czech lady or so. So it's really less attractive. You have some hardcore fans, but for general public, this is of course less attractive. The same thing you see with Formula One, for example. When I was boy, everybody watched Formula One, and then it somehow vanished. But now in what we see in Netherlands, and first up, and that they have new drivers. So suddenly, Formula One became again like the big sports. Yeah? So it's very specific, I think, very country-specific thing. The sports. While the series, movies, I would say we have something in common.
Interesting that so the taste can change and the user behavior can change over time. I think we will have more on that until Christoph is telling us what is the actual favor in Orange Poland's customer base, or what viewers are favorable there.
Thank you for being together with you on this panel. In Orange Poland, I think that we are the aggregator of the content, so we have a quite huge portfolio of the content from many of the broadcasters or TV providers. When I think on this, what is important in terms of the content, I would say that it could be similar to the other countries. But one element which is quite interesting, that when I'm preparing for this panel, I'm checking how much time people spend with TV in Poland, and it is more than 4 hours every day, and which is much more than the average in Europe, which is more than less about 3 hours. And on the other hand, also I'm checking the category of the content which is the most viewed by the polls, and these are they are the movies. They are the series, but what we have seen that the growth of the series are much bigger than the growth of the movies. And currently, the most popular content, the most popular still are the movies, which is declared by the 75% of the customers which use the TV to see the movies. The second are the information channels, with 55%, and on the third position are the series, with the 55. On the lower positions are the entertainment and the sport content. But on the other hand, when we look at the audience of the sport events, as these are very interesting correlations we have seen, because usually we used to say that when your your team won, or your national star won, then you see some correlations. And we had a check with our last Roland Garros tournament, when we have Iga Świątek, and before this meeting I checked that she had 3 matches, and the first match was seen by the less than 200,000 people. The third one was 300,000 people, and the last one, the final, was by the almost 1 million people. So it shows that really there's a huge correlation between your nationals, the sports stars, and the sports events. And still, even if we see the growing role of the series and the movies, sport is something which is really important, and building the strong relations with the customers, with the content providers. So these, I would say, the main triggers. Of course, on the other hand, we have seen significant growth of the OTT usage. Now it's usually, because it was like the 25% of the people declared that they use OTT during the last month. Now it's almost 30%. So it's a really significant usage of the OTT streaming services. These, I would say, main elements which I see in terms of the content consumptions on the Polish market.
Yeah, it's interesting what you all saying. I mean, sports plays a role in some ways or the other now, with the sports rights are being not or limited through the COVID crisis. So do you think that first of all, what makes your customers unique, you think, but also how is maybe also the current COVID crisis impacting the behavior, or not also changing the taste or the appetite for content? That would be really good to understand. I think also for the rest of the markets. I mean, is that the same everywhere, or is there huge differences what people do? I mean, what you already pointed out is, Krzysztof, that people watching more, and in Poland they're watching more on average anyways compared to other markets in Europe. But it'd be good to understand, what do you think, or what you have seen or experienced, how your customer base or your customers have changed? Who has some thought about that in the last couple of months, for example?
Yeah. Maybe, do you want to comment, Krzysztof?
No, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, well, actually, the numbers that we had in March, when it was the first wave, and we were in lockdown for 2 months in March and April, there were no sports. Sports were interrupted. However, we've seen increase in viewership pattern. And because especially people were watching mostly series and movies, of course, and the viewership hours have been increased significantly versus, let's say, prior year, or versus other months that, no COVID was there. Now, what happens at the same time is, especially in Greece, the Greek Super League, although was interrupted during the COVID months, it continued during the summer months. So we had a completion, let's say, of the championship, unlike other countries, like, I mean, in France, where the French league interrupted and did not, I mean, conclude even during the summer months. So again, we saw an increase, traditionally in Greece, summer months, exactly because of the weather and the good weather, etc. People are going for holidays, so we have this traditional lower viewership. However, exactly because of this summer we had the sports and we had the Greek Super League, it was increased. The viewership was increased. If I had to say, I mean, what I noticed is that because of COVID, definitely viewership has been increased. But if you have, during COVID, sports, then you see even higher increase.
Wow. So sports, it still creates that stickiness. Is that the same for you in Poland or in Czech? Do you think that that would also have an impact, or what happens for those operators who have no access? I mean, you were probably pretty lucky that you had access to exclusive sports rights. So, you know, some of the they discontinued the broadcast or interrupted the broadcast in the first place, right? So could you share some customer insights or change of behavior that you've seen in your markets?
Yes, one element which we have seen definitely, and it was linked with the growing number of the VOD customers as VOD service. And we check both, let's say, the Netflix, the growing of the Netflix, but also we're checking the other operators, local operators, and we have seen the growth of the base, like roughly about 15% in one of the cases, which is quite huge growth in terms of the base after the COVID. That's one element. Also, we have seen that we ask customers about their declarations in terms of the usage of the content, what they starting to doing at home. And again, we see that the streaming services are the number one in terms of the content at this moment. Like customers has to spend much more time at home, so they're going to this binge watching trend. They started to use these services, and it's even much higher impact than the linear TV itself. I would say that it was linked with this what you mentioned, that during the some part of time there was no significant sport events, and some which were planned were cancelled. Quite important. And so that's definitely what we see, that the COVID impacts on the growing trend in terms of the SVOD services in Poland. It was also in line with the approach of the telecoms, which started to offer the bundling with the free of charge Netflix or Amazon service, such offers, just to build the stickiness, because we had to play somehow with the trend which were linked with the much lower selling of the devices. When we planned previously, like the smartphones, tablets, and also TV sets. So we somehow offset the offer. On the other hand, customers also looking for the way how to spend the time. So this, I would say, the main trends which we have seen in terms of the additional customers, like the boosting of the OTT trend as the way how to consume the content.
To understand for the audience, you had a lack of devices that you can deploy to the customers because you have a shortage of devices, or what do you mean by that?
I mean that we have seen two trends. One is customers started to buy in commitment services. On the other hand, one of the part of telcos revenues are linked with the selling, with the selling of the devices. Yeah. And we have seen there is a much lower approach to buy the new devices by the customers. So the telco started to think on how to, let's say, how to find the additional source of the revenues as well. So building maybe offer around the VODs as the value for them. Because with the COVID, which is maybe a much wider trend, we have seen that customers in Poland started to avoid any long-term commitments. So yeah, that's what we have seen.
It makes sense. I mean, people will not want to spend huge amounts on the devices, but they will rather prefer incremental fees or small amounts of subscribing to a VOD service that they can cancel anytime, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes perfectly sense. So, Jeremy, can you a little tell about what happened in Czech and Slovak and also in other markets where M7 is probably operating? Have you seen similar increase of what happened with the customer, what changed in the audience behavior, or in general, say anything that is unique to say the previous years or compared to previous years?
Yeah. Let me connect to what Krzysztof just said.
Yeah, sure.
Some people or general public believes that the operators of TV services are the winners of the crisis, because people watch TV much more. But well, we don't live from watching TV, right? We live from
Yes.
subscription. And what happened with readiness of people to pay for TV entertainment? And it's definitely the readiness to pay it doesn't follow the viewership increase. One of big OTT players here in Czech Republic published recently report about real data of viewership from their systems, and there was shocking number. Average customer watched 11 hours a day. Yeah, this is crazy.
Sorry, Jaromir, where was that?
Yeah, in Czech Republic. Yeah, this is
but 11
but
hours per day.
11 hours
Special
in
service.
average.
Understood.
In average OTT service, but of course we shouldn't call it viewership. It means the devices were on. Yeah?
Like radio.
So people, so some people have like a TV 15 hours on, right? So it doesn't say how much people really watch. Then you have people meters, of course. People meters bring much better view, but also here the linear viewership increased by 28%, which is quite significant. So not only as what services VOD, but also this linear viewership. And surprisingly, the most significant increase was on segment of youngest viewers. They in general watch less than the old people, but the increase was quite significant on this segment. On our platform, we are mainly DTH platform, so we don't have a possibility to measure exactly what people watch and when. So we don't have this. So for our customers, it's probably our customers are probably more conservative. People have satellite TV rather in rural areas, small cities, etc. Probably older people compared to the average. So what we can see is really the consumption increasing, and I cannot complain that our commercial results are also as good, but just wanted to stress out that this readiness to pay is not in line with readiness to watch.
So
I
you
think
say,
my colleague will confirm.
Yeah.
I think,
May I add one
Yeah, sure.
element to the discussion how customers now behave in terms of the content. What also we check that we see when we compare the regions, we see the growth of the content or the usage of the TV in the big cities and on the rural areas, nor in the small cities, and that's quite interesting. And comparing to this point which Jaromir mentioned, we see that now the pay TV or the content is the most important for the older segment in Poland as well. And what's more, we saw also the growth of the usage by these customers. Also, I would say the digital services. So they started to switch to the, let's say, digital services because they have to do it, and that's quite new trend because it's opened a new market for us. And it's what Jaromir mentioned is quite interesting also that we as the telcos, let's say, especially as the incumbent, we have the widest network, fixed broadband network. We invest into FTTH, and in fact, we can provide now services based on the DTH, based on the partnership. So let's call this like the third-party network, but also we developed on IPTV. Plus, we have ability to build on OTT services. So that's quite big, interesting position for us because we can address both markets at the same moment, cities and rural areas, in fact.
yeah, that would lead also the question. I mean, now with COVID, we have seen in all markets an increase of time spent with video on demand, with linear television, with more devices. The question is where could we keep up with that growth? Can we keep that growth? Or and you had already an example for that, you have to be on more networks and more platforms to really cater to all sorts of audience, from younger audience to older audiences. But it would really interesting, how we keep that momentum. I think that everybody in our industry and businesses is sort of benefiting from this crisis. And the question is really, is that is an untypical growth strategy, right? So it's nothing that somebody has planned for. So the question is, where is your growth in the future coming from, and where are you placing your bets for growth? That would be, I think, interesting how you could keep that momentum, for example, and keep the audience stickiness. And what are you seeing? What are the measurements that you probably will take after, say, you hopefully get out of this by mid-end of next year, finally? And I think that the consumer behavior would have changed until then, and how we work, and so. But what is your vision on that for your operations in each market?
Well, I mean, if I can have a comment on that, the way I see it is that habits change.
Mm-hmm.
They change forever. That does not mean that people will continue to consume constantly on an average of 11 hours per day. I mean, by the way, for Greece, that is, 8 hours during the COVID, let's say, period, which is really very increased when, the average time was 5 hours time spent per day last year. So this increase, which is almost 30%, it really shows the impact of COVID on viewership. However, at the same time, people during this period have changed dramatically the way they are consuming content and programming. They have upgraded their household internet lines. They have taken a bigger television. They have a smart TV. They have various devices. They subscribe probably to more than one, let's say, services, because they want to have choices. That actually accelerated an already change on the viewership habit. So I think, COVID just gave a big push to what is, the consumption of content through platform agnostic, let's say, devices and various means. And by selecting and going directly to the content which is of relevance. So I see the growth definitely to continue, especially on pay TV. And I see these habits actually that are here to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, please, Christian.
It's even, I think that it's quite in line what we see here. Adding this element which I mentioned previously, expanding this trend much more significant, much more faster to these segments which were rather linked with the traditional way of the content, of the entertainment, spending time, because they have to change these habits quite significant. When I look precisely on the Polish market, I don't know how it is in your countries, but we also see one quite important driver of change, which is the saturation of the TV sets. And in terms of the smart TV, we have a saturation on the level of the 20% of the household, which means that there is a huge space for any type of the OTT boxes. And that's the way how also try to operate or try to address the market and try to build, let's say, the first line to be a super aggregator, like started to provide their own OTT boxes, showing the customers that they don't need to invest in new TV sets. Because of these boxes, they have all access to the old type of the services. And that's the trend which we see. On the other hand, also, we see, and especially in the younger generations, like the millennials, Generation Z, quite significant share of these laptops and smartphones as the way to use to consume content. So these are, I would say, changes which were before the COVID, and also now were speed up by the COVID and will stay with us. So as Jaromir mentions, for telecoms, that that will be great time, I hope, in future as the providers of this content. The tricking element is discussion about the building the value on this in relations to the content provider. And that's the most tricky question for telcos, comparing to the idea of the super aggregator trend versus the access to this data to be really able to provide the recommendations, because it's, I would say, the biggest value of this content provider, the service providers, the knowledge on the customers, versus the business model, and where we can generate the revenues and increase our margin. In fact, that's, I would say, main challenge linking with this trend, which is boosting now, like the OTT, like the on-demand service, like the non-commitment, like the small packaging, etc. Such elements. Yeah. This is what we see, at least.
It is also a question from the audience, just because we just discussed that, but I think it's even go a little bit more deeper in this conversation is, do you have seen or have you changed your content offerings or your strategy around content offerings durably, as eventually life will turn to normal as the vaccine is coming? So do you think that you will switch to that? Or I think, as you just said, you give the consumer more choice, you bundle differently, you bundle it with devices. So do you think you will change that? Or you think that the content lineup or the content, amount of content or the kind of content that you currently offer will stay the same?
If I may comment, content becomes more and more important. Yeah. When I started in TV business, there was said content is the king. And then it somehow vanished, you know, during the year. And now we are back. We are back in the same stage. So what I see in our platforms in Czech Republic and Slovakia, we need to move from the position of a traditional provider of TV entertainment via satellite dish to real content producing company. We are now part of Canal Plus family, so we have the chance to share the big libraries of Canal Plus, the co-productions and everything. So we need to bring really something new to the public, something different from the mainstream. And I have to confirm what Krzysztof just said. The technology, like the OTT thing, etc., this plays enormous role. You know, sometimes people ask, "Who are your customers? How old are they, etc." And there is no good question for that, because typical customer for TV service is not individual person; it's a home. Yeah. And with satellite TV in your living room, you cannot satisfy the kids, the youngsters, etc. So you need more screens. Yeah, you need really OTT service to satisfy the customer. The customer is the family, is the home. Yeah, it's not one individual. Like for mobile phones, this is one individual, pretty simple. But for TV, it's still. So we need to be much more creative in the technology and much better in content. It's not content for one individual, but should be content for almost everyone in the typical family.
Yeah, and the question is really with these multinational or international global companies rolling out in more markets, how much flexibility will be left for you, or maybe that's even a chance to bundle it in different ways, right? So that you cater exactly to these different needs in the household. And I think that is something also to generate a return of investment, because you're competing all of a sudden not only with local operators, so you competing, and also you aggregating these multinational global players like a Disney, like a Netflix, like an Amazon, and at the same time you need to cater to your markets. And I think that would be interesting to see how this crisis is probably impacting the ability or embracing the ability to package content in a different way, or exactly more, yeah, so you can have a certain amount of linear and then have a certain amount of on-demand content. What are your thoughts? Do you think you will be more flexible in this, or are you then forced but allowed to do that, because for the rights owner it's sometimes very difficult to accommodate that kind of need?
Well, the way I see it is that the fact that more and more content owners launch their own streaming services, which actually it is a competition to what we call the traditional, let's say, operators, means that consumers are increasingly split between sources, different sources. So they have to decide what to watch and where and for how much money, which is not, I mean, that easy, you know, for a customer, for a household, especially where there are different needs for the various members of the family. And this, as we know, this is a fragmented landscape, we all understand, but it presents at the same time a big opportunity for those providers that actually are already established in the various markets and have the capability to become aggregators, to offer bundle services. I mean, my view is that the bundle services eventually will prevail, because the household will have, I mean, just to get the telco services, the pay TV services, and the over-the-top services through a subscription, which is actually through a package, which is value for money, and offers a simplicity. Simplification and value for money will eventually be the key reason for me, for a consumer, to select a service. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for someone really to cope with all these new constant entrances and different content. And maybe, I don't know if you have noticed, but here in our market, we're actually Netflix and Disney and Disney Plus and the Apple TV have launched. But the relevance of the content still is far behind of what, I mean, Greeks feel like being relevant for them. So, of course, Netflix is a case on its own. I mean, and there is no way that we could say that, of course, I mean, it has, I mean, a very strong position in the market, but most of the people see it as a second, let's say, a supplementary service rather than the main service. They have a bundle service at home, taking the their sports, the telco services, etc., and this is a complementary one. And when you go to Apple TV, then you see only a couple of shows that maybe could be of interest for the local market, no more than that. So it is that new world where, I mean, everybody wants to try, I mean, the various, let's say, services, but eventually this cannot be a sustainable model.
There's also, we don't have that much time left, but there's a couple of questions from the audience, and that goes through exactly what Catherine just explained. There was one thing that the audience were interesting to, if you have an opinion on, if you're becoming more and more an aggregator and you're offering more on-demand content to satisfy the subscriber crave for content. So how you keep you on them on the platform, and is that really something that increases your net promoter score? So is that really making an impact? And the other question was about what is, and I think just probably answer that, is the importance of local content versus the international content. So somebody has from you another opinion on that, that would be maybe interesting for the audience. There was actually a question, and if you're onboarding more of these broadband VOD platforms, Katerina mentioned, is that really how you deal with that and how you promote then your own business or your own service and combine and the mix? So I think it gets more and more crowded in the service offering. I think that's what these people, the audience, interesting in how you build your own market proposition without offering too much different content from others. So I think that's what the audience sees as a challenge, and maybe you have an opinion on that, how you balance that go-to-market between your own channel lineup, your own production, and what you aggregating. Any thoughts on that? What is,
If I
is it a
may,
challenge or is it not so much of a challenge? I mean, having the internationals under your wing at one side, on the other hand, you have your own branding and you have your own content that you creating and that you're producing.
I believe that more content in the VOD format is necessary, so people can watch when they want. Yeah?
Mhm.
And then not only the big players like Netflix, etc., and maybe some other content on our platform. Definitely, maybe less American, more European, and definitely local. We believe that investment in local production makes perfect sense.
Okay.
We cannot compete to Netflix. It's impossible. But why not to be in the home next to work next to each other very well? I think people will like both.
Okay. Yeah, there was
I fully agree. I mean, the local content is definitely for markets, and maybe, I mean, this is something that we need to point out, that markets that actually have their own language. It's not, I mean, English-speaking countries, because I think there things might be a little bit different. But for markets that they have their own language and certainly a specific culture and mentality, local content is definitely something that is absolutely needed for the operators, the local operators.
Yeah. Yeah, we see also now the Amazons and Netflix not only be forced by the regulatory framework, but also starting producing the Spanish shows, Scandinavian programming. So they also start catering to European.
I would add to this one element, I would say, or let's say, agreed with this what was mentioned, and also what we see that operators they now also started to offer the live content via OTT as a technology. One element. And when I look at the Polish market, in fact, we have almost all big players, like the global players. We are still waiting for the Disney Plus. But the biggest change on the Polish market will be the service built by the Cyfrowy Polsat, which is the biggest Polish telco operator and TV operator, and the Discovery, which is owner of the TVN services. So this would be like the OTT service built around the strong local content produced by the Cyfrowy Polsat, but also by TVN, but also around the Discovery content. And that would be one of the elements which may change a little market. When I look at position of the Orange at this moment, we do not have their own content, and we were in the position of the aggregator. And that's why we think that for us being the aggregator, it's something which could be the value for the customer. And which is the value? Related to this, what Katerina mentioned, what we see the value of the convergence. We have 1.7 million converged customers, of which 1 million used also our TV services. And that's really the value for them, that they have one package, with one customer care activities. At the end of the day, on the mature market, the players would like, or the content providers sell content as much as possible. So they started to share this content between each other. So it's unique in some sense, of course, but on the other hand, it's not an issue to serve this content, especially when we would see on the approach of the Cyfrowy Polsat, who bought lots of the sport content and have lots of own content, but at the end of the day started to resell this content to the others. So that's quite interesting element as well.
Unfortunately, we have only a few minutes, and 2.5 minutes left. There's one question from the audience, maybe a very quick round. They were asking, is there a note? So all agree in the audience, no, content is king, but they say, are you seeing a noticeable demand for 4K content in your markets or in general? Quick round.
I would say theoretically yes, practically it's very unique at this moment. We have to have it to use it really.
It goes also to device penetration that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
You have 20% of the homes have a smart TV. How's the situation in the other markets, or what do you think 4K major differentiator for the
Well,
future?
I think it has something to do with the size of the screen. If you live in an apartment like the place in my background, you don't have space big enough for a huge TV screen on which you would recognize difference between 4K and HD TV. That's the problem. It doesn't mean that 4K is irrelevant, but I'm afraid it's still some time to go.
We have only 1 minute left. Katerina,
Yeah.
very quick one.
I fully agree. I think, we will need some more time before we see, a big change. I think it will take longer than the change from